Thank you, Andrea. As Andrea mentioned, it was actually she who identified Norman's work and made the acquisition just prior to my arrival here last year. So thank you to Andrea for bringing Norman's Africana Rocking Chair into the Allens collection. I promised Norman I would keep this conversation short and informal. That was a lie. It's not our brand. But sincerely, thank you for coming to Oberlin to spend this time with us and with students in your fabulous woodworking demo yesterday. Tonight, we celebrate the acquisition of your work into the Allens permanent collection and our new exhibitions, including one largely inspired by your chair. Norman Teague is an artist and designer of conceptually driven furniture and functional objects. His practice is rooted in community, mentorship, and education. In 2016, Teague co-founded the design collaborative Black House Studio, blending contemporary aesthetics with locally sourced materials to create objects, spaces, and community events from Chicago's South Side to Lagos, Nigeria. In 2019, he founded Norman Teague Design Studios. Teague is a creative collaborator on the Barack Obama Presidential Library and was named one of 25 creative leaders of the future by Wallpaper magazine. Teague holds a BA in product design from Columbia College in Chicago and an MFA in designed objects from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He is currently adjunct professor in the School of Design at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Teague's works are in museum collections, including the Art Institute of Chicago, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the Allen Memorial Art Museum. His work has been exhibited at Rossana Orlandi Gallery in Milan, R & Company in New York, and Design Miami. He was included in Documenta 13 in Kassel, Germany, and this summer will represent the United States at the Venice Biennale. Congratulations, Norman, and thank you to the curators of the United States Pavilion for being here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Norman Teague.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for that introduction. It sounds really good coming from you. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for coming tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here in Oberlin. I think I had a picture in my head of a very conservative town. And when I got here, I was welcomed by, I think, the Ginkgo Gallery. And she was just so cool. She just made me so relaxed. And I've met other people since I've been here. It's just been a real nice time. The students last night, I appreciate anybody here from last night?
Some
couple? Okay. Thank you guys for giving me some time. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Norman. So you and I will talk for a little bit.
Great.
I have some questions, basic stuff. Then we'll open it up to the audience for any questions you may have. And before heading into the beautiful reception, we'll pop into the exhibition so that you can fasten a plaque to the bottom of the chair and sign it, marking the work's completion and opening the exhibition. So I'd like to start by admitting that over the weekend, a 6-year-old ran into the gallery, beelined it for your chair, and jumped up on the platform to sit on it. As curators and custodians of the work, we found this deeply upsetting, whereas you were ecstatic.
I love it. It's a chair. I mean, give it 50 years and maybe, it'll just be sitting there. And I would just love it if there was a kid that came in every now and then.
I mean, maybe if we had like 15 of them. But...
yeah. Or a conference room full of them would be even better because they get used on a daily basis.
So this is a question I think a lot of people might have because your work straddles this line between design and contemporary art. Making elegant conceptual work that also is functional comes with these kind of challenges. 6-year-olds not identifying it in that way. It sort of is in this gray zone, especially when the work lives in museums as opposed to in a private home. Is a work like Africana Rocking Chair meant to be used? How and by whom?
So conceptually, when I think about designing a chair, yes, I am absolutely thinking that it will get used because I'm all about is it comfortable? Are the proportions right? All that matters. But then it becomes a piece of art. And then all of that kind of goes away, and it becomes this piece that sits on a mantle. And so if anybody wants to sit on my chair, please come to my studio in Chicago, and I have a couple extras that you could actually sit on. But yeah, I think my conceptual thought is that it will get used even by museum goers. So maybe you should buy two and then just have one there for people to sit on.
Hint taken.
Plug.
So obviously private collectors also buy and commission your work, and they might sit on them in their living room or dining room. Do you know of any institution that has opened them up to that sort of functional?
I had one at the Art Institute for a little while that was being sat on. Okay. And then I had a client who bought 3 at a time for his collection, but I believe he's sitting on them. I believe he's actually getting use out of it. But I could check back with you. But if we can check a box right now, I will send an extra chair here. Well, you'll have to send it. You'll send it to the Denver Museum, and then it'll go to the Cleveland Museum, and it'll just rotate.
Okay. Well, I'd be interested to know what the text of that checkbox says exactly. Okay, well, let's return to this sort of exhibition versus use values. And actually, on that note, though, are you able to share what you're doing for the Barack Obama Presidential Library?
So a lot of the early work was, I'm going to say, a really keen sort of listening, talking to community members. Lots and lots of young people were involved, lots of Post-it notes and workshops to really think with the community that lives there about what they'd like to see in the museum, how that story and narrative gets told from the people that live there. And then I designed a few pieces that hopefully you'll get to sit on one day. Very public pieces that you can sit on. They won't be on a mantle.
Okay. So our chair comes from your Africana series. Can you tell us about the influences of that chair, such as the legs and the rocking element?
Yeah, the rocking really is referencing the American rocking chair, like taking real hints from how do you do that in a funky kind of way that respects all the sort of design history icons that I grew up thinking about. The Eameses, these angles. I literally sat the chair next to an Eames chair to make sure that the proportions actually fit. And then the carving is more of this ancestral thing, a thing that I hardly get to see in a modern piece of furniture. And so how do I implement sort of that cultural side of me inside of my American culture and give respects to all of it in as sexy of a way as I can?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess it's more in the Simney stools than in the rocking chair, but what is this? What is like the leaning back? And can you explain what postures that comes from?
So this is the Simney stool? Or is this the Africana?
Well, I think it's more associated with the Simney stool, right? This leaning back.
Yeah. So the Simney stool is also me in a design class at the Art Institute thinking still about how do I be cool and give a piece of furniture that allows a person to. A lot of my thought process was like being at Milan, people walking around, seeing exhibitions and coming to a moment of rest, but not a full rest in a chair. I was thinking about a slight perch. And so the perch started first, and it was very simple. The rocking sort of came almost accidental because my prototype was kind of being tugged around and tested, and this rocking thing kind of made sense. And then I went into sort of master, how do I get this thing to rock, but not continue to rock? So there's little nipples. Is it up here somewhere?
There's some, yeah,
there's little nipples on the front and back of the rock so that it allows it to sit in a certain position on both sides. And that took a little bit of testing before we got it right. But once it hit, it actually, I like to compare it to getting into a new relationship where, you know, you meet this person and you're like going out to dinner and you're laughing and, you know, the trust is sort of, it's building up over time. And
arguably your butt comes into contact with a chair before someone on the first date.
Yeah. But yeah, let's hope not. So that became a thing where people would actually, the first thing they do was straddle it. It looks like a saddle.
Right.
They want to get on and they want to just sort of rock. And that really feels good on your hips. If anybody wants to try this at home, it's okay. It just takes a little bit of trust. And then the sort of sitting on the perch position and then rocking back, that's where it takes a big amount of trust because it feels like you're going to fall and then it catches itself and you're just like, ah. And that's the sound. You guys remember that sound? You're like, ah. Okay. All right. So that's the semi-stool.
This is sort of, I had a question related to that, which is that the exhibition that your work is in, something like a good armchair, getting uncomfortable with modern and contemporary art, brings together works that find value in discomfort. And even your Sinmi rocking stools, which you'll eventually see in this slide show, encourages postures that are not necessarily relaxing or restful. Like you said, they're kind of in-between postures. Mm-hmm. Do you ever consciously design objects or experiences to be uncomfortable, either physically or intellectually?
Nope, not going for uncomfort.
Okay.
Never.
Okay.
Never am I going. I'm going for difference. I am challenging the user ever so slightly, but I think a little bit of that challenge comes with getting to know it.
Sure. Some critic said that your talk shit chairs were about uncomfortable conversation.
Yes, and those are particularly positioned to face one another.
I see.
With the idea of thinking about a tough conversation. Yeah.
But with your butt in a comfortable place. So this is the chair in the next gallery over that the Allen has just acquired. You commissioned the leather seat from the Southside luxury designer Johannes Lacour. Who is he and how did you come to collaborate with him?
All right, so Johannes is a great writer who got into a little bit of trouble at a younger age. So he went away for a little while. While he was away, he learned how to work with leather. And the moment that he got from being away, he started to use that skill set to do things that were relative to his sort of lifestyle. So he started making gym shoes. While he was in the joint, he actually made purses and bags and really sculptural elements. So keep an eye out for him to be next in your collection. But he's a super talented writer who just came out with his own podcast through Invisible Institute in Chicago. But he's also a leather worker. And we met through a project. I worked on retail stores in Chicago. And the owner of one of the stores introduced us maybe 2 years ago. And the moment I met him, I was just like, how do we work together? How do we work together? And so coming up with this, I knew I wanted to bring about a level of comfort to the Africana that a piece of wood probably wasn't going to give me. And so that extra cushion, he hit it right on the head the very first try. And then I'm really attached to leather, like vegan leather, no imprints, simplicity. And so he hit it right on the head. And we've been working together ever since. We just did a huge lounge for Design Miami just recently. So, and everything he does, he kind of does it by hand. Even though the machine is right there, he just chooses it's kind of hand stitching.
It's so beautiful. And then it is emblazoned with text that's inscribed into it. Do you remember the text that's on this?
I can't remember it off the top, but I know it means in the Yoruban language.
Yep.
To build communities or circular communities of economy is what it's sort of referencing. And that was literally our collaboration, but thinking about the skill sets that we have hyper locally to us. How do we use those to get things done?
Wow. Okay. Which is beautiful because that's the relationship that you formed with Johans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought it was very fitting to our relationship in particular.
Right. And you have inscribed other like leather parts of other furniture with other sayings or words from Yoruba language.
I think what I'm trying to hint at with the Yoruban language, and I don't know any, I mean, I know a few words here and there. I've visited Nigeria. But I think in looking at the world around me, everyone I know comes from somewhere and there's a language that comes with them. And as an African American, we've been sort of stripped away from any sort of language and so how do you start to really rebrand this thought around speaking your native tongue? And so that's why I'm sort of instigating the words as they fit with the pieces that I'm making.
Yeah, sort of undermining the hegemony of English.
Yeah, we'll slip it in there. Eventually, everybody be walking around talking Yoruba.
I know I was torn between turning the chair at an angle such that you could see that, but then you sort of don't see it.
Gotta buy two.
You just buy two.
Well, back to back.
We're on it.
I think they're sold in sets. Y'all just missed them. You didn't get the memo.
There's been a lot of attention to your incorporation of style elements from Ghana, from Nigeria, Burkina Faso. Concurrently, you're also engaging with European design traditions, Chicago being the location of the new Bauhaus, and which is also referenced in, I believe, the naming of your firm, Black House.
Yeah.
How do you personally think about the Bauhaus or the other Mies van der Rohe, these other European modernist design lineages, and what went into your decision to combine them with both African and American design traits?
Yeah, growing up in Chicago, these icons are their daily language. You know, the Mies van der Rohe building. I live down the street from IIT. I think I fell in love with Bentwood because I was following the Eameses so tightly. And so I guess it kind of naturally works its way into an aesthetic that I enjoy.
Yeah.
I can't help but reference it because throughout design school, this is your design history class, you know, and so picking up on all of that as I go along, I'm constantly still looking for a reference or like some inkling of an aesthetic that leans towards Ghana or towards Nigeria or towards I think it's why I love like making furniture myself, because I want to have a hand in it. And so I think that I find to be really the precious part of creating. Like, I think it's the therapy that comes along with it. And so I'm inspired by, you know, choo-choo trains and Legos and all kinds of things. But these things, I think, are stronger references to thinking about proportions and scale. And I have a mental library of like keeping an eye on those things while I'm trying to instill this. I can't be radical, but I'm trying to instill an aesthetic that really feels comfortable to me. And something that, and I think I started to realize that museums and a lot of institutions really do a great job of recording moments and things. And so I just wanted to have things recorded that might say there was a Black man here at one time. I can tell, you know, and I can use that as some sort of capsule for the next person who's looking for a reference or some sort of relevance.
So I want to come back actually to the Bauhaus in a second, but On that point, for much of your career, you've been searching for figures and narratives in design history that reflect you, and you've voiced disappointment with the lack of Black designers in the field from a young age. Would you say that that's changed since you're a student?
I still want that. I see, I can reference more people. I can reach out to more people. I think a big struggle I had at SAIC was critiques where I would have a Black subject that I was sort of referencing in some of my work, but I didn't have a Black faculty member to sort of help push that along. And so that was an issue. But I think that I just wrote an essay about this too. And I really am happier today to see an Amanda Williams across the room, to be able to see faces that I know I can relate to. I grew up working in architecture firms, and I was the only Black guy. And it was uncomfortable enough that I wasn't as educated as everyone else in the room, because I had a community college degree from to get in the door. But I think seeing spaces now, seeing advocacy now around design, architecture, and then going to a Design Miami and seeing a handful of Black designers that are actually selling work and doing things in the vein of design and art is comforting. Absolutely.
This is something that you're sort of known for, is creating a pipeline of Black and people of color designers, actually, from high school programs, from college programs as well.
Yeah, I think it's part of my duty to make sure that I am seen, that anyone that looks like me feels comfortable in these spaces. I do. I find myself going out of my way, because my first class at UIC in design school, I went to class one day and I never went back. And that's how bad it was. And so with knowing that, yes, I tend to add a little extra time, leave a little extra space. I don't mind being the kid on the Wheaties box in an effort to promote. I think to promote the beauty, because I have a love for design, for making things, and I think somebody else might find it the same way. It's almost therapeutic that I get to exercise design muscles on a regular basis. And so, yeah, I think it's really important that some of us go out of our way to make sure there's an extra layer of comfort there.
There's something you said at the beginning of the workshop yesterday that really struck me and has stayed with me, which is, you said, I love working with my hands. I use fabricators sometimes, but I love working with my hands. I love carving wood. It is a release of trauma, I think you said. Is that possible that you said that?
I think therapy comes in a number of different ways. Yeah. And if you've ever molded a piece of clay and shaped it, you just kind of lose yourself in it. Yeah. And so carving wood and sort of being in the shop, making things, having room to make mistakes is a big part of that. I think it's I went to, just in the last year, I've gone to Haystack and Penland. And I feel like these places are these are yoga retreats, you know? It's so much fun to just indulge yourself into that one thing, be it glass blowing or ceramics. But I believe we'd have better cities if we had these every 4 miles or something. It's just and in my neighborhood, there's enough vacant lots to put one every 2 blocks, you know? You can put a wood shop over here in Inglewood and a metal shop. But I just believe that these are really phenomenal outlets. And if you want to call it art or call it design, I think it's a release for a lot of people. And if you could do it for a living, it's a privilege. Yeah. So I feel privileged. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. I wanted to ask if you could describe some of your projects that incorporate salvaged materials, thinking about those neighborhoods that you're just describing, such as the zigzag bookshelf, and why use these materials instead of simply buying them from a hardware store.
Oh, to have a stack of old, like, nicely characterized shelves from a thrift store on the south side. I mean, I guess you have to know the story behind it. This little old lady who was like the neighborhood salvager. To get those from her were a privilege, and then to let them sit in my studio until I thought up just the right way to use them. I think it's almost like creating booklets. You know, you're taking one story and making another story. And so I feel like there are loaded materials. And if we can take that and add another layer to that beautiful story already, then it goes far for me. And again, I think it's sometimes you can't afford to go out and buy the new wood.
Yeah.
And so if you come into my studio, Tiziano's been there, it's surrounded by stuff. And so I have new shows coming up, and sometimes I prefer to use older materials. They allow me to be a little more intuitive. And then sometimes I start out in, sketch mode, and that goes to a harder drawing, and then that goes to prototypes, and then that goes to a more concrete, solid thing. All of which is, a part of a process that I really enjoy.
You said a minute ago that it's important to make space for mistakes. I think, I don't know if you used the word mistakes.
I did.
You did. Right? Do those mistakes ever work their way into the final product, or is it important to leave space to make them, but then that gets sort of thrown away?
I mean, they go into my personal repertoire. I don't know if I'm too keen on sharing my mistakes so much, but
there's no mistakes in our chair. That's
I mean, if you come to my studio, there's a wall of mistakes. There's like a room full of mistakes. They just never make it anywhere past the studio. But I think those mistakes are part of the bigger picture. Like like it's a part of iterating. Like you make lots of things, and some don't quite make the cut, so they go to scrap. But I think scraps, like, do you guys ever see, I don't think anybody follows me, but I used to make a wooden bow tie some years ago, and I made over thousands, like 2,000 of these bow ties. Every one I made by hand, and they were just little carving therapeutic moments in my studio, a lot of sanding, a lot of dust. And I think that was like a moment where I was just like, nothing's garbage. I think I got it from Theaster too, because when we were working at Theaster studio, it was just hard to tell, like, is that art? Is that garbage? I don't know.
Some questions
According to Theaster, everything is art.
Everything is art. Speaking of that very question, your project for the Venice Biennale, to the extent you're able to talk about it, this summer, the Venice Architecture Biennale engages with reuse and recyclables, but not your familiar materials of wood, metal, and leather. Do you care to give a teaser for that project and describe what it's been like to work with materials that are newer to you?
Oh man, this has been really fun, and it makes me really consider what both my curators are pushing us to do. And I think what I've felt the most was having exploratory moments. Like, again, this is surrounding moments of lots and lots of mistakes. So plastic is not a material that it's very foreign to my studio. In fact, we had to rent a lot of space in order to do some of the work that we're doing. But we've come across so many beautiful, I'm gonna have to call them very curious mistakes, who turned out to be sexy in some ways. And so I think in exploring it, we've had a short while to get familiar with what can be done in the processes that we're extruding, we're melting the plastic down and we're extruding it. And I guess the best way to explain it is if you took a tube of toothpaste and just squoze it out really, really slowly, and then try to capture it as it's falling out. And it's hot, so you can't touch it, but you want it to cool in just the right spots, because once it cools, it won't move again. And then you can't reheat it again after that. So the mistakes are forever. But I think a lot of them are turning out really beautiful, but there are mistakes that won't make it to Venice. So come and get some mistakes if you want to.
I can't wait to see how that project turns out. That's so exciting. I would love to open it up to the audience. Is that okay to take a few questions?
Looking forward to it.
So Jill is moving around with a microphone for anyone who has questions for Norman.
First up, okay. So my question is around like ownership, because you mentioned you incorporate these ideas of like a past lineage and also incorporating ideas of like a new America or new Americana. So I'm wondering, like, when you make these pieces, if you're like keeping in mind this old lineage and if it's like ownership to that kind of group of people, if it's kind of like a new person or community or idea they're trying to move towards. I kind of wonder like where your art and what's made for, and you're kind of incorporating these different kind of cultural ideas and histories. That makes sense.
So tell me what the question is.
Oh, like I'm wondering like how when you're incorporating these different ideas between like, different lineages and cultural ideas, like who you're making this art for in that capacity when you have so many different inspirations and stuff. That makes sense.
That's a great question. I think I just want to see it exist in the world. I try not to take into consideration too much of what people might think of it, but I do want it to sit sort of beautifully, make you think differently, make you sit differently. I don't know if that's uncomfortable, but different. Definitely, I had to think about the uncomfortable. But I think when people approach some of my work, I don't know if they are afraid to sit on it in particular ways, or like I have a bookcase that sits like a spinning top, and I think people are afraid that it'll roll away if you take a book off, and so there's this certain comfort that you first have to have with it. It's almost like let me take a full walk around it and examine all that could happen if I approach it. And then other things I think I'm making because like writers write when they want to get something off of their chest. I make when I want to get something off of my chest. And sometimes there's a narrative there, and it's my narrative, and I'm not always there to explain what that is. So I'm happy if someone takes it upon themselves to say, I'm going to apply a narrative of my own. And so, I hope that answered a little bit. Okay, cool. We can talk later. Anyone else? I've fallen in love with basswood.
We just need the question to be read into the microphone for the recording, please.
What's your favorite wood?
Thank you.
Basswood is my new favorite wood. I've been in love with walnut for a number of years, simply because of its variations in colors, its density. But this, because I'm loving carving right now, I think me and basswood are having a real hot relationship right now. And if you've held it, it's almost like balsa wood, like super light, easy to work with. I'm not the greatest carver, so I need something that's going to be giving in this relationship. And so basswood has been, one of the softest, yet strong, because the work that I do is like 3 inches in diameter. So I need the strength, but I also need to be able to carve it lightly. So basswood. I like white oak. But yeah, those are my 2 babies, walnut, bass.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm wondering why the concept of sitting is so important and powerful for you.
It's not really. But I think, I think it's more about comfort. It could be a stool. It could be there's always a challenge in seating as well. There's like these like mandatory, like it's got to be 18. And I'm trying to like jack that up a little bit, or change that around a little bit at times. I think there's also a level of play that comes with each. Like I'm never trying to do. So I'm going to say this. He's going to hate me, but one of my design assistants back home, he's designing a chair for a show he's got coming up, and he showed it to me, and I was just like, well, first of all, it looks a lot like my chair. But I was like, I was trying to get him to like think a tad bit deeper into like what's been done already, and then how do you want to fit into that like shelving unit of chairs. And so I think what he admitted to me was he was concerned about how much it would cost. And then I said, okay, whatever it costs, I'll pay for it. So what chair would you now design if you didn't have the parameters of like, it's gotta be made out of whatever I can find around the shop? I'm like, I will buy you bent plywood, because when I first met Daniel, he was working at Columbia College bending a piece of wood. And he called me 2 weeks later and asked me if he could work with me. And we've been working together for about 3.5, 4 years. And I told Daniel, go back to those thoughts you were having when you left school. Go back to those sketchbooks and don't worry about money. And let me see what you'll design now. Why did I talk about that? Why a chair? Come on. Yeah, I think chairs are challenging because they don't just exist around you. You're thinking about other people. And in the process of that, you can be thinking about other postures that can be taken in that chair. Or if it can be sat on at all. Like a chair could be wrapped in nails and be really beautiful from afar. But when you get up on it, you're like, I wanted to try that. But if you put the nails closely, now I'm challenging myself. If you put the nails close enough, I guess it would kind of become acupuncture. Yeah, it's another class. Sorry.
Hi. Sorry. You spoke a little bit about your assistant's process with his sketchbook just now. And I was curious about your relationship with drawing in the design process. If you could just elaborate a little bit on your drawing process, and then Absolutely. If you would ever be willing to share those drawings in an exhibition or a collection in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I had a flood in my basement, and I wasn't into archiving, and I didn't know I could sell drawings to museums either. But about 30 of my sketch pads got wet. And my wife, for the first time, saw how passionate I was about my work. Because I cried. I was like, wow, that's a lot of years of drawings. It's wet. I saved them all. I took them out to the backyard, put them in the garage. But they have water damage. So my process with drawing is it's loose. It's quick. I love to draw. It's always a beginning stage. But now it's a lot looser because I'm drawing a lot more because we have a lot more projects. But I have a few. We could sit down and talk. I have quite a few. I think when I was younger, I went way further into detail about where I wanted a particular thing to go. And now I start loose and then I go straight to like small scale prototypes or something that I can touch. And then I try like a larger or full scale prototype. Like I said, in my studio today, things are moving a little faster. So I'm sketching real fast and then I'm handing it off to my design assistants to sort of to help improve upon the definition a little bit. Yes.
Hello. So I was wondering, how do you go about collaborating with other people while ensuring that your idea that you want to be conveyed through your artwork is still shown and present through it?
Sure. Good question. I think when collaborating, you're already setting the stage for a certain level of compromise. And I think the compromise for me is why I like to collaborate. Because I think there's a moment of layering. I also think that in a community, the reasons why we have things like, gentrification can be really ugly when someone comes in and just does whatever they want to do without listening to what the pre-existing minds might want to see in that. So collaborating for me is like, it's like listening. It's like two people coloring in a coloring book and seeing what the things that come out. It's going to be different. It's going to be different than just you. But I think it's really important to allow those moments. To compromise and to be flexible is kind of crucial. And then you always come up with these lovely things that you probably wouldn't have done if you were doing it by yourself. So is that answer? Yeah? Cool.
Joe, there's someone in the front row.
Do you have a favorite piece of work? And when you do things, is it difficult to give them up sometimes?
Ooh, yes, I do have some favorites. That's a great question. And I priced them so high that it's easy to give them away. How's that? Because I really, ultimately you want to have enough money to make it again, right? You just like, okay, I made enough money to make it again and I can pay rent. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, it's definitely difficult. I have a piece that's still in my possession from my MFA. And I love it. It's really beautiful. It's too big to fit in my house. And nobody will buy it yet. But I've priced it so high where whoever buys it will understand that it's special to me.